Well, hello, Mhotep, and welcome. I'm Morgan for the Egyptian Magic podcast, talking today about Tawaret, or the Hippo Goddess, who I'm going to kind of argue is the female counterpart of the Egyptian god Set, kind of feminine aspect of it, although she's a goddess in her own right. Her name means the Great One, or various names. She's got a few different names. Usually her name is translated as the Great One or Her Majesty, being an obvious reference to her great size and imposing stature, kind of hippo goddess, that's what you'd expect. After all, her awesome nature. She's a kind of giant as well, one of the old giants of Egypt, which is quite an important aspect of the mythology. And also, she's the personification of the sanctuary, the sanctuary or a special type of sanctuary in the region of Luxor or Thebes. The parts of the temple, perhaps the whole temple, is referred to as a sanctuary. And she's the kind of personification of that because she's quite big as well. And that crops up in some quite unusual ways. Now, not surprisingly then, the hippo is the largest and most dangerous of the inhabitants of the Nile Valley, of the waters. And considering it as an animal archetype, it is a very ambiguous entity. Though some images of the hippo goddess, Tawaret, make her look a bit cute, but she definitely isn't cute. In wildlife parks these days, the hippos, as they say, are quite hard work, really. They're not cuddly, nice animals that ever get used to human beings, which is perhaps the way they are. They're always a little bit wild. And of course, in the Nile Valley today, where hippos still live, they cause a lot of trouble, and a lot of people are killed by hippos or injured by hippos every year. So that's obviously got something to do with the archetype. The male and female hippos are treated almost in Egyptian culture, ancient Egyptian culture, as different species of animals, although they obviously knew that they were, the same species, but they treat them in different ways. The male hippo is a well-known and important avatar of the god Set, who's the god of confusion and plurality, quite passionate entity that we've talked about many times, who, because of his very aggressive nature, especially the male hippo, he was hunted by the Egyptian males as the ultimate test of their machismo. Really, they were hunting alone in a very flimsy boat with a spear or a harpoon, armed as the god Horus, really. And this was quite a test. It was a real test, obviously, of their masculinity. Whether they really distinguished between the male and the female where they're hunting is a moot point, although the males tend to be bigger and more aggressive for no particular reason, although both of them are quite awesome creatures. The female may be a little bit smaller and probably doesn't engage in quite the same aggressive mating behavior that males are noted for in lots of different species. So males fighting each other and fighting anything in sight. Even so, the female hippo is quite an awesome prospect, really, and will fight off any threats to her young, or just to her territory, really, from humans or any other dangerous predator. They're not predators themselves. They don't eat meat. They're vegetarians, but there is nothing that predates them. So if they were predators, they'd be the apex predator. And that would be the same with quite a lot of the Nile crocodiles. They seem to kind of coexist without causing too much trouble to each other. I think because there's an understanding as animals that if the crocodile starts hunting, trying to eat the sort of smaller hippos, then there'll be some sort of massacre. Basically, all the other hippos who are quite capable of killing a crocodile will go ahead and do it. So there's a kind of a standoff, and they're quite often seen together. Perhaps for this sort of reason, this protective behaviour is why the female hippo, Tawaret, is particularly associated with childbirth and child rearing and the process of birth, because she's the archetypal mother. Like the human mother who will fight to the death, really, to protect her children. Her size and her shape as well, if you think about it, is quite sort of portly animal, often depicted in a way that they don't standing on their hind legs in a kind of anthropomorphic pose, and that would make the belly kind of quite extended and her weight there, so she kind of looks like a caricature, I suppose you say, of a pregnant woman who's also quite sort of large-bellied and all the rest before birth. So perhaps that's one of the reasons of the association. It's interesting too that the male hippo Seth also acquires some of these maternal characteristics and is involved one way or another in the protection of the newly born. This is a kind of quite an ambiguous two-edged thing. It's almost like, sympathetic magic, or I say some of the spells. There are these notable spells, quite a lot of different pieces of magic associated with the male god as well, and childbirth. Maybe with the female, it's more protective and for a good birth process. For Typhon, there are these spells in which you kind of almost threaten the woman, or certainly threaten her personified reproductive parts, her womb, that if she doesn't either stop bleeding or start bleeding or get pregnant or whatever it is you want to do, then you're threatening them with the power of the male Seth, and this will really mess you up, in other words. So that's one possibility, or maybe it really is maternal, and you get these tusks of hippo goddess. You can't tell whether they're male or female, which are used in associating with protection of children. Now, in terms of the ritual cycle and the ritual year, the Egyptian civil calendar has several months and festivals that you could connect with the goddess Tawaret, with the hippo goddess. As well as confusion that she's the personification of the sacred sanctuary, so her name, or the name of the sanctuary, if you like, would occur in a lot of other contexts. But I think it's, it goes quite deep, this association, and even though these festivals have moved around a bit within the Egyptian timeline itself, to such an extent that I, for all sorts of reasons, as I've explained elsewhere, reverted to a kind of older lunar calendar before these sort of quite mixed up later calendar from my point of view, in which I associated her with the 11th month of the year, which would be the months coming very close before the summer solstice, really, before the turning point of the year, where again she's called Her Majesty, Opet, Khemetic, and there's the name of the month, really. Which becomes in Greek Epiphi, by some weird linguistic trick. If you look at these festivals, even though they're kind of festivals for everybody, not the kind of sort of intimate magic sometimes that we tend to work, you can learn a lot. You can broaden your understanding of the nature of magic to do with this goddess and why she's so important. Occurring as it does then, if we place it then just before the 6th month of the year, which is called the birth of Ra, you can see that she's like a midwife, again, coming before the birth of the sun. And that mirrors the way that the cow goddess Hathor also acts as a kind of midwife for the birth of Horus, and the protection of the whole business with the cult of Osiris. But in this case, the hippo kind of clears the way for the birth of the sun. That's one of her important mythological functions, really. And so you have a reflection of the two great cults of ancient Egypt, the cult of the sun god and the cult of the Osiris and the underworld. Those are the two major things. There are lots of other cults, of course, but they seem to be the main ones. Another function of Tawaret, the hippo goddess, is the kind of holder of her mate, Seth, to kind of keep him under control. I talked about her being a sort of counterpart of the male, but she also kind of anchors him in his place, but not pushing him away, but keeping him at the center of the whole cosmos, really. So it allows the world to turn, and perhaps it's the power of Set that's harnessed to make the world turn, but in such a way that he can't charge around all over the place as the male hippo is wont to do. And so the other gods get a chance to do their work in the process of the world. So looking again then at some of these festivals and the important ritual occasions that are associated with this god. One feast is the Feast of Opet, which again seems to be another name of the hippo goddess Tawaret or Opet, but associated with a particular temple, a sanctuary, really. And this one occurs at the time of the inundation, or when the Nile has flooded, but perhaps the worst of the flood has kind of happened and things are starting to calm down and you can still navigate the river. So it's calming down, but that's a moment when they take advantage of the situation to have a festival, because even though it's a chaotic business, the flood, it's also very welcome, of course, because it kind of renews the whole topocosm and enables as well the whole process of regeneration of a rebirth of the god and of all the divine realm to occur each year. This is fueled by the kind of Nile flood, by a process of chaos and catastrophe. There's this festival then, which is called the beautiful. Sorry, the same festival is called the Beautiful Feast of Opet. It's called the Beautiful Feast, which is a kind of nice way of referring an important feast, and it begins on the evening of the 15th day of the month, which we know would be 15th day is actually the full moon. So it's a full moon festival. Originally, even though these things slipped around a bit in the later Egyptians thing, originally when lunar calendar was to the fore, it was obviously a full moon feast, as so many other feasts were in the Egyptian tradition, but it continued for the rest of the month. So it kind of starts then, but it kind of chugs on. There are no records of that particular form of the feast before the 18th dynasty, so there's, 18th dynasty, there are about, another 18 to go maybe, but so you're about halfway through the entire long sequence of Egyptian culture. But before the 18th dynasty, which is the dynasty with Tutankhamun and Akhenaten and Hatshepsut, there's very little record of it, so it's quite likely that it was something that was really put together at that time compared with the older lunar festivals. It's actually said that Queen Hatshepsut made this an annual event, took this over and kind of really made something with it, and it continued pretty much until the fall of paganism in Egypt, and it didn't stop actually. It continues after then. It continues within the Coptic religion, and in some form or other, it's still celebrated in Egypt to this day, in Luxor, but associated with one of the local Muslim saints, and they have a boat festival and lots of aspects of the this ancient Egyptian festival are kind of quoted within this nominally uh, Islamic feast, and that's a fascinating issue in its own right. Even the kind of the things that people kind of move around on or whatever, but whatever. So it involves a procession in which the main god of Karnak, which is the god Amun, which means mysterious, is taken southward. There are two major temples on this side of the river which you can visit in Luxor, and they're kind of connected. Uh, and one's called the southern Opet, and one's called the northern Opet, and basically you have the Amun, kind of male god in one, together, but he lives there with his wife and his child and all the rest. But the kind of idea is that he's going to travel southwards to the other temple in Luxor to meet his consort, the mother goddess Mut. So you can see how motherhood and the sacred marriage it plays out a lot of times in all of this mythology. In later times, both journeys were accomplished by the river on boats. But the one going outward, which would be going against the stream of the river, was assisted by crowds of pilgrims who would actually tow the boat of the god along the river, which is obviously quite a spectacular thing. I think they have some sort of version of this even now played out for the tourist industry, I suppose. And they could travel backwards along a kind of sphinx-lined avenue, which goes on for about 2 miles to return. So there are quite a lot of strenuous activities which are enlightened by drinking songs and drinking, and quite the army comes out in the ancient world and even now to kind of join in and to kind of make more of a thing. And while this process is taking place, this procession, the taking of this quite small object but in a shrine on a boat and everything, takes a certain amount of organisation. This would be an occasion for the taking of oracles as well, which is another important Egyptian activity. The movement of the shrine itself could be interpreted in such a way that you could ask it questions, which you would give your question to the priest on a piece of papyrus, and they would give it to the god and they would observe the answer. Or maybe you could just shout it out and observe how this procession moved. You could imagine if the thing fell over, or if the priest stepped backwards or whatever, or quicken their pace. These are all things that could be used to interpret what's going on. It's also a festival associated with another interesting speculation, which is the role of the god's wife, which is an earthly priestess taken or recruited from within the royal family itself, who acts as some sort, if you're going to have a sacred marriage between a god and a goddess, in effect, this is probably going to be reenacted by the human participants in the ritual on lots of different levels, as the crowd itself, but also as the two specially designated priests and priestesses who are going to enact the sacred marriage in the middle of all this. And again, you get this idea of birth or conception, birth houses, all these sorts of things are coming together and are associated, I think, with the cult of the Hippo Goddess and Tawaret. Nobody knows too much about that particular aspect of the ritual, thus all the more reason to speculate. More material is becoming available, and we can work it out, and we can work out our own version of it, of the sacred marriage, which may involve sexual rites in the so-called birth rooms, which again would be associated with the Hippo Goddess and with Opet, and where Amun conceives an heir, if you like, where the whole process is, even though he's got an heir, we know Khonsu, the moon god, and all the rest, but it has to be redone every year. And this immense ritual landscape is the place where these giant entities really range and live out these things. Another important festival you would say is that it is another beautiful festival as well in their terminology based in this area is the beautiful festival of the valley, and thus this is also placed within a month that seems to bear the name of Opet, whether as the hippo goddess or as the sanctuary. And it involved again the taking of the cult statues, this time of our moon, the mother goddess Mut of Thebes, and their child Khonsu the Wanderer, the moon god. They take it from this enormous temple at Karnak. This time they take it across the river on a kind of alignment really to Dera Bakhri, which is the temple of Hatshepsut, which is aligned with it's 3 miles away, but it's aligned across the valley, and there are lots of necropolis is there, of the Valley of the Kings is there, Valley of the Queens, Valley of the Nobles, ordinary people's relatives are buried there. So this is also to do with the realm of death, of visiting the tombs and taking new supplies and worshipping the ancestors in a way. And this is also to do with Tawaret. So this tradition seems to go back a very, very long way in some form or other. It certainly goes back to the Ramessid era. And I think you can take it further back if you look at a document, a medical document, a magical papyrus, the Papyrus Ebers, of which is to do with medicine, quite a lot of it to do with women's medicine and childbirth and all the rest. So maybe there's the connection, but somebody in ancient times had jotted down an old lunar calendar on the back of the papyrus, probably a medical practitioner, because the gathering of herbs and medicaments is often done in what you might call a biodynamic way, is done in association with the cycles of the moon. And we already saw how the full moon is associated with this festival, is used for this festival. Perhaps that's why the lunar calendar occurs there. I'd say that that particular festival, that may have extended over just a few days. The other thing I wanted to mention is quite a lot actually, that in this immense complex that we call Karnak, which really is huge, it's difficult to believe it, quite a lot of it hasn't even been excavated. So there are all sorts of temples and shrines there, and a very interesting temple that is called the Opet, which could just mean sanctuary, but the goddess Tawaret figures in this place as well. And this is a small thing very close to the next door to the temple of Khonsu, the moon god. Again, all very suggestive. This is a place to do with the mysteries of birth and generation of Osiris, but also Amun, the two together, Amun and Osiris. It tells us that there was thought to be some connection between the two gods, which is one of the things that makes Egyptian mythology so complicated, but also so interesting. One of the things that I really like about this shrine is that in the classical era, in the Greek period, it was associated, it was inhabited by a mystery cult. The priests who worked in this enormous ritual complex had their own cult, if you like, their own mystery tradition, which they learned special things. And this birthplace, this birth house at Karnak, was the place where also this kind of subterranean or subcultural mystery cult met, and their mysteries were revealed in all sorts of very interesting ways, which probably no time to go into now, but just the fact that a mystery cult was there and that the priests were trained in these secrets traditions in a place that is also connected with Tawaret. She was worshipped also in outside of the Nile Valley in the oases such as the Oxyrhynchus, or rather she was at the Dakhla oasis and also at Set's other place, Set's other association, which is Oxyrhynchus, which is supposed to be sacred to the gods, the male aspect, the male god Set, but she was also worshipped there. She's a very, very ancient mother goddess, put it that way, who originally came from Heliopolis and continued in later times in the Greek tradition as the birth goddess to Oris. Her protective powers, I would say, are also invoked during sleep and when you're involved in dream landscapes. So it's not just birth, it's also to do with the realm of sleep, the underground, the underworld, the unconscious. Another of her names, especially in astrological texts, which I've kind of better mention now, is Raret the Sow. It could be the Egyptians didn't distinguish between hippos. They may have thought of hippos as a kind of a bit like a pig, as a very, very large variety of pig. That's a possibility, and that would also have interesting Setian associations as well. The pig being a Setian animal. In astrological texts, she is shown in all these diagrams, which you can Google, or I'll show you a few from my collection. She's always shown close to the center of things, close to the center of the cosmos, surrounded by all the other gods. Perhaps because she's so heavy and big, she acts as this anchor for the whole of creation. And in fact, she's shown holding this central pillar, which may be a reference to a constellation, or it could be the pole star. She's holding the pillar around which everything turns. And not only is she holding the pillar, but she sometimes has connected to the pillar a golden chain, which is significant as well. Sometimes red, the gold part of it is significant, and the chain. And at the other end of the chain, of course, is her mate Set. Set is chained to the center of the universe, very loosely held there by his counterpart, the Hippo Goddess. She kind of holds him there. So he's confined there. He's not, Set is, in various episodes, he's kind of put in his place, if you like, for something he's done, usually to Osiris or wherever it might be, spoiling things in some way. But he's not banished to the outer reaches, which is an interesting idea. Or he's actually kept in the centre. That's significant, I think. He's kept in the centre, and the goddess who's charged with keeping him at the centre, of chaining him there in some way, is Tawaret. And you can look at the way the chains are arranged and you can think he must be going along with this to some extent, which is one of the kind of interesting things we learned about from studying this magically. Rather than crashing the whole scene and cockpit or whatever, there's some, perhaps because Tawaret, who's sometimes called in some texts his concubine, his actual consort. That's another way of looking at it, because she's not his official wife, but she seems to be an aspect, his other half. Then it's his other half. So her role is to make sure he doesn't get carried away and send the whole thing crashing down. And she is strong enough to hold in there, and there's obviously some understanding between them that he's not going to struggle too much, and she ensures that his captivity is not going to be too bad. Hence the golden chains. And he agrees, if you like, and she can be very persuasive one way or another, despite the fact that he's actually bigger and more powerful. In astronomy, in the text from this time, which are very, very interesting, she always appears. She's very, very prominent. She's shown often with a large crocodile on her back, which may be a reference to the fact that hippos and crocodiles live together, or it may be that the crocodile is also part of her. I say in the wild, hippos and crocs do share an environment and must live together, but in constellations there is this very long snake-like constellation which we know as Draco, the dragon. And the text is telling us that Tawaret is in Egyptian terms the equivalent of the dragon. She is this great, powerful, giant dragon that exists at the center of the cosmos and moves around a little bit, and sometimes she's chaining one deity and sometimes she's there by herself, and sometimes she's holding the center and sometimes she's moved slightly off center. But one way or another, she's the kind of center of the universe, the Egyptian universe, which is this dragon. And in rituals, we recall all of this and we invoke the positive power of the ancient dragon. That is the one fixed point that exists within our cosmos. And if you think about that, as has been said famously, if you can find one fixed point, you can move the entire world. I don't know, Archimedes, I think, said that, but he's obviously thinking about this idea of the one fixed point is obviously a key idea. Okay, so those are my ideas so far, research about the hippo goddess Tawaret, who's incredibly important and occurs in all sorts of hidden and secret ways and is involved with immensely important activity of procreation and birth. We focus mostly from the magical tradition on this, on the astral connection, the astral aspects of her as the one who enables us to find a point, a fixed point, a samadhi almost at the center of the universe from which everything else follows, including this dance of dragons, really, because Seth is like the other dragon of these two dragons. This isn't how we can fix onto that power as she fixes Seth and move our universe and create our magic and understand the potentially chaotic processes that exist at the center of things. So that just remains for me to read you a little bit of a list. You've got quite a lot of prayers and ideas to do with Tawaret, but we call upon her to awake in peace, so that we can embrace the void. Your heart's strong enough for its joys and its worries. You can go, but when you awake to life, rest, lie down assured of good health. Good night. The gods protect you, their protection is before you each day, and no bad thing will ever approach you. And even Opet, the demon of chaos, is repelled from your bedchamber where he might cause trouble. Opet the Great protects you in your long and powerful life. The day and night are illuminated, and you shine forth, for she guides your steps on the right path, and you know what is needed. And the god Ptah provisions you, fills your storeroom with food and drink aplenty and in good measure, and your diary and your records are all in order and well composed, the mistakes of the past forgotten, and the staff that rests in your hand is well made and sustains you, so that you may break bread with the wise. Your cares all behind you, only reason lies before you, for the best is yet to come. So praise be to Tawaret, the hippo goddess.